And welcome back, all you bulls and bears and betas out there, to the buzz of this Proxyopoly spin-off series we call the Proxyopoly TM Podcast. I am your host, the Proxyopolist, formerly known as the Jackal of Trades. Here again with another exclusive, proprietary Proxyopoly TM research report for none other than Lockheed Martin. That's right, Proxyopolists. Following the Proxyopoly TM scores for Deutsche Bank, BlackRock, Tesla, Walmart, ExxonMobil, Meta Platforms, Amazon, Spotify, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Nvidia, DWS Group, and General Motors, we now have on the docket today a scathing research analysis of the governance structures of one of the most renowned defense contractors in the United States today, Lockheed Martin, and not a moment too soon in this geopolitical environment. So without any further delay, let's get started. Lockheed Martin is a public company whose primary customer is the state. That business model can be stable, lucrative, and strategically important, but it also converts governance failures into public governance events. When procurement integrity, program execution, and pricing controls slip, the consequences arrive not just as a margin miss, but as Department of Justice press releases, GAO recommendations, congressional letters, and policy shifts that ripple far beyond a single stock ticker. As of the data cutoff in the upcoming annual general meeting, Lockheed Martin reported $75.048 billion of sales in 2025 and $5.017 billion of net earnings, $6.908 billion of free cash flow, and an end 2025 backlog of $193.6 billion to $194 billion, depending on the presentation format, while also disclosing large reach forward program losses, including $950 million on an ongoing classified aeronautics program. The company explicitly links increased demand to geopolitical conflict conditions, stating that, quote, recent regional conflicts, unquote, have demonstrated the integral role of its products and that it is rapidly transforming to meet increased demand, including by expanding capacity and harnessing artificial intelligence and autonomy. Proxyopoly TM treats that conflict-linked profitability narrative as an environmental social governance risk amplifier. The more demand depends on conflict intensity, the more governance volatility matters. The Proxyopoly TM ratings and overlaying Proxyopoly TM score will be deliberated in this podcast episode for your listening pleasure and analysis, Proxyopolists. In addition to that, there will be governance policy change recommendations for Lockheed Martin based on the Proxyopoly TM ratings and score and their subsequent findings, as well as 2026 Annual General Meeting voting recommendations, in which Proxyopoly TM will produce recommendations on how to vote the upcoming Annual General Meeting with regard to the re-election of its Board of Directors, citing votes for, votes against, votes abstain, or votes withhold on respective directors of the board. Furthermore, Lockheed Martin is a U.S. defense prime whose governance operates at the junction of capital markets and public procurement. It reported $75.048 billion of sales, with a heavy dependence on the U.S. government as a customer, and a $193.6 billion backlog at year-end, also presented as record $194 billion backlog in its earnings release. These are metrics which are previously referenced in this podcast already, but re-emphasized to note, with the prime customer being the United States government, the U.S. taxpayer is also footing this bill of sale. The result is a company that can look financially steady while still carrying material governance volatility potential. When the business model is long cycle, regulated, and politically salient, a single proxy vote can meaningfully affect not only shareholder outcomes, but also the public governance ecosystem surrounding procurement integrity and national security supply chains. Lockheed Martin's own disclosures make the ESG tension explicit. The company states that, quote, recent regional conflicts, unquote, have demonstrated the integral role its products play and that it is transforming to meet increased demand, including by expanding product capacity and harnessing artificial intelligence and autonomy. Its earning release similarly framed 2025 as a period of unprecedented demand, driven by combat-proven performance. Proxyopoly TM treats that conflict-linked demand narrative as ESG relevant because it heightens scrutiny risk, lobbying risk, and procurement integrity risk, raising the beta-like volatility impact of governance decisions laid out via the Proxyopoly TM score. The Proxyopoly TM framework quantifies that volatility through 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings. And they are the Proxy Accumulation Resistance, or PAR, Bylaw Fortification Index, or BFI, Shareholder Hostility Quotient, or SHQ, Executive Entrenchment Factor, or EEF, and Regulatory Evasion Measure, or REM, and calculates a final Proxyopoly TM score as the normalized weighted average of the 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings. The objective is not to moralize. It is to measure the extent to which Lockheed Martin's governance structure and conduct can amplify governance shocks across markets and public systems across the globe. Moving on to the Proxyopoly TM ratings. Proxyopoly TM rating number 1. Proxy accumulation resistance, or PAR. Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 0.76 for the proxy accumulation resistance of Lockheed Martin. By definition, proxy accumulation resistance measures how difficult it is for outside investors to assemble meaningful voting power to influence outcomes, such as board composition, governance policy, and strategic direction. Higher values indicate a higher friction coalition environment. Negative values indicate a more contestable setting. In this analysis, Lockheed Martin is not a controlled company. It is an institutionally concentrated one, which is its own form of practical resistance. In the 2026 proxy statement, the company disclosed 3 large beneficial owners above 5% shares outstanding. State Street owning approximately 14.9%, Vanguard owning approximately 8.9%, and BlackRock owning approximately 7.4%, based on their Schedule 13G/A reporting as of December 31st. That ownership pattern does not create a single proxy monarch, but it does mean that any meaningful governance outcome often depends on convincing a small number of large institutions whose default incentive function is usually, quote, stability plus policy compliance, unquote, not proxy insurgency. This is particularly acute for a defense prime contractor. A proxy contest as a consumer company can be framed as a strategy dispute. At a defense contractor, it is easily reframed, fairly or not, as an operational continuity risk in a critical supply chain. The governance reality is, therefore, that coalition building is less about share accumulation and more about shifting institutional posture under reputational constraints. The company's own disclosures underline its scale and importance. With a large backlog, heavy government revenue dependence, long cycle programs, etc., conditions that raise the perceived cost of disruption for many mainstream holders. Lockheed Martin does not provide tools such as special meeting rights and proxy access that reduce raw mechanical difficulty of doing something about it. However, proxy accumulation resistance is about practical influence, not theoretical rights. The institutional and national security adjacency effects keep proxy accumulation resistance meaningfully positive above zero, however, under positive 1. Now moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 2. Bylaw Fortification Index, or BFI. By definition, Bylaw Fortification Index scores how heavily the charter bylaws fortify incumbents with means such as poison pills, supermajority thresholds, classified boards, constrained special meeting rights, and procedural barriers to shareholder voices. In this analysis, Lockheed Martin's governance rulebook is notably less fortified than many peers of comparable size. The 2026 proxy statement highlights no supermajority voting requirements, no poison pill, with annual elections and bylaw features that include a market standard proxy access regime. Shareholders may call a special meeting if they individually hold 10% of outstanding common stock, or in the aggregate 25%. That threshold is not activist friendly, but it is real. It is not a decorative right reserved for the mythical 50% holders, as found in some companies. More importantly, proxy access exists and is clearly ascribed. A stockholder or group of up to 20 holding 3% continuously for 3 years may nominate up to 2 directors for inclusion in the company's proxy materials. Proxyopoly TM treats proxy access as a material reduction in fortification because it lowers the cost of board access relative to a full-blown proxy contest. And I'll say this again because I would like the proxyopolists at home to know exactly what would be needed to file a proxy contest at Lockheed Martin. If you wanted to do that, you would have to be a part of a stockholder or group of stockholders of up to 20 stockholders holding 3% of shares outstanding continuously for 3 years. Meaning that if you hold 3%, or a coalition of 20 or more shareholders got together to hold 3% of shares outstanding, this theoretical shareholder or group of shareholders could nominate 2 new directors to the board of Lockheed Martin. BFI is not more negative because of 2 friction points: the special meeting threshold and aggregate requirements still favor large holders. Second, proxy access is capped at 2 nominees, limiting the speed at which shareholders can reshape board composition through the company's own proxy channels. On balance, the rulebook is not a fortress. It is a gated community with reasonable visiting hours and a not so strict HOA. Ergo, Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of negative 0.20 for the Bylaw Fortification Index of Lockheed Martin. Moving on now to the Shareholder Hostility Quotient. Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.05 for the Shareholder Hostility Quotient for Lockheed Martin. By definition, Shareholder Hostility Quotient measures management and board posture toward shareholders, namely responsiveness, transparency under stress, and willingness to adopt governance reforms when risk profiles warrant them. In this analysis, Lockheed Martin's shareholder posture is professionally courteous and structurally defensive on the reforms that matter most in high-stakes governance environments. The board openly acknowledges recurring shareholder pressure for an independent chair, noting that shareholders have considered versions of the independent chair proposal multiple times, and that the board unanimously recommends against the 2026 independent chair proposal. Notably, Proxyopoly TM does not recommend vote against this proposal. Proxyopoly TM strongly recommends voting for the independent chair proposal raised by shareholders. The board's framing of this argument is a familiar governance refrain. Flexibility is good, mandates are bad, and shareholders should trust the board's judgment about whether concentrated leadership is best. Proxyopoly TM treats repeated resistance to chair independence as a shareholder hostility quotient positive indicator when paired with elevated regulatory evasion measure and executive entrenchment factor conditions, which we will get into shortly. Because governance reforms are most valuable precisely when the company is most sensitive to compliance and reputational shocks. The meeting format compounds this distance. Lockheed Martin conducts the 2026 annual meeting exclusively online, remotely, as if they are still locked in the past of the pandemic and its endemic fear. Explaining that the format facilitates attendance and enables stockholders to participate regardless of location. Virtual meetings can widen access, but in practice, they often narrow confrontation necessary for healthy corporate governance. The proxy details that only stockholders with a control number can participate and ask questions, and it outlines process constraints typical of virtual formats. Proxyopoly TM treats virtual-only governance as modestly shareholder hostility quotient positive when the business model already limits transparency due to classified programs, as this is the nature of the defense business contracting with the United States government, because it removes one of the few high-friction accountability venues shareholders possess. To be fair, the company points to strong compensation vote support at the 2025 annual meeting. More than 92% of votes cast approved say on pay, and it describes year-round engagement. That is not the profile of a company openly antagonistic to shareholders. Shareholder hostility quotient rises here not because the board is rude, but because it is persistently committed to preserving leadership concentration and governance discretion, even as the enterprise's societal and regulatory stakes escalate. Finally, shareholder hostility quotient incorporates environmental social governance contexts. Lockheed Martin's own disclosures link increased demand to recent regional conflicts and unprecedented demand tied to combat-proven performance. When a company profits as conflicts intensify, it cannot treat shareholder governance concerns as optional aesthetics. The board must treat them as volatility controls. The continued preference for maximum discretion in leadership structure pushes shareholder hostility quotient upward. Now, moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 4, Executive Entrenchment Factor. Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.90 for the executive entrenchment factor of Lockheed Martin. By definition, executive entrenchment factor measures how insulated top leadership is from replacement or constraint beyond normal performance dynamics, particularly CEO-chair duality, succession transparency, and board mechanisms that concentrate influence. In this analysis, the entrenchment center of gravity at Lockheed Martin is explicit and defended. The board has, quote, determined that a combined chairperson and CEO role, along with a strong independent lead director, best serves, unquote, the company's needs. That is textbook entrenchment. Consolidating the gavel and management authority while arguing that a counterbalancing structure, such as lead independent director, is sufficient. The lead director role is described as robust, with authority to chair executive sessions, act as primary stockholder contact, call special meetings of the board/independent directors, and serve as chair of the governance committee and ex officio member of each board committee. Proxyopoly TM credits this as mitigation, but mitigation is not elimination. When the CEO chairs the board, information flow, agenda setting, and oversight cadence are structurally influenced by the very executive being overseen. Entrenchment is further reinforced by the board's consistent resistance to independent chair mandates. The proxy notes that shareholders have rejected prior versions of the independent chair proposal, and that the board unanimously recommends against the 2026 version, while Proxyopoly TM recommends a vote for any and all independent chair proposals. Proxyopoly TM treats the board's recommendation of vote against this shareholder proposal as a strong executive entrenchment factor driver because it indicates the board's preference to preserve discretionary concentration even when shareholders attempt to hardwire a check. Executive entrenchment factor is not higher than positive 1.90 because Lockheed Martin's director elections are annual and it has proxy access, features that materially reduce the worst forms of structural entrenchment. Nonetheless, in a system where governance shocks can become national headlines, CEO chair duality remains a meaningful volatility amplifier. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM rating number 5. Regulatory Evasion Measure, or REM. Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 2.10 for the Regulatory Evasion Measure of Lockheed Martin. Definition: Regulatory Evasion Measure measures propensity to incur significant regulatory or legal exposure, or to operate in ways that attract enforcement, sanctions, or high-profile oversight interventions, especially where the pattern suggests governance control weakness rather than unavoidable baseline regulation. In this analysis, Lockheed Martin is by nature a highly regulated government contractor. Some regulatory exposure is baseline. Regulatory evasion measure becomes meaningfully positive when the record shows substantial enforcement actions and recurring high-stakes oversight concerns. The most concrete recent enforcement event is the U.S. Department of Justice announcement that Lockheed Martin agreed to pay $29.74 million to resolve False Claims Act allegations of defective pricing on F-35 contracts, in addition to $11.3 million previously paid to the Department of Defense regarding undisclosed cost and pricing data issues on some of the same contracts. Proxyopoly TM does not classify this as a routine legal scuffle. Defective pricing allegations implicate procurement integrity in environments where information asymmetry is structurally high and competition can be limited by design. Oversight escalation also appears through program monitoring institutions. The United States Government Accountability Office reported in 2025 that it made multiple recommendations to the Department of Defense regarding the F-35 program, including evaluating Lockheed Martin's capacity to meet planned deliveries on time and re-evaluating incentive fees to better achieve the desired schedule. Even when Government Accountability Office, GAO, recommendations are directed to the Department of Defense, DoD, rather than the contractor, Proxyopoly TM treats them as part of the governance risk ecosystem. They signal large-scale schedule and incentive misalignment concerns embedded in a flagship program. Regulatory evasion measure is further justified by the company's own disclosures of significant program losses and performative issues, including a $950 million reach-forward loss on an ongoing classified aeronautics program and additional large losses in other segments in 2025, with explicit warnings that additional losses could be material if performance issues persist. Program losses are not by themselves regulatory evasion. But in government contracting, especially fixed price incentives and classified environments, they often become the substrate for claims disputes, oversight escalation, contract renegotiations, and, in worst cases, procurement integrity investigations. Proxyopoly treats large, repeated reach-forward losses as regulatory evasion measure relevant because they raise the probability distribution of future enforcement or high-intensity scrutiny. Tax disputes also factor into the compliance profile. Through the 2025 10K indicates that a notice of proposed adjustment related to a tax accounting method change was resolved in Q4 2025, with related uncertain tax position removed as of year-end. The fact of resolution reduces forward risk. The magnitude and visibility of the episode still reinforce the point. Lockheed Martin operates in complex accounting and tax interfaces where regulatory exposure can spike quickly, bearing in mind that the American taxpayer often foots the bill of sale for much of Lockheed Martin's revenue. There is little margin for error here, and there ought be no excuses for malpractice. Finally, lobbying intensity and political scrutiny increase regulatory evasion measure in terms of public governance externalities. Senator Elizabeth Warren's 2025 letter questioned Lockheed Martin's lobbying for expanded tax benefits while already enjoying enormous profits, explicitly linking profitability, tax policy, and public accountability. Proxyopoly TM treats that as a risk amplifier. When political scrutiny attaches to contractor profitability and procurement outcomes, the pathway from corporate governance issue to public governance intervention shortens. Having now laid on the table all of the Proxyopoly TM ratings underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score, we now have time for a short intermission for the Proxyopolist at home to take a break. Go walk to the pantry. Grab yourself some artificially flavored Proxyopoly TM snacks. If we produce snacks, we don't, but in theory, you're listening to me portray a reality where you're now walking to the fridge and cracking open a cold Proxyopoly pop. And it's crisp, isn't it? Indulge yourself in Proxyopoly pop. It's gonna make you feel less thirsty than you did when you started this podcast. Quench yourself with knowledge, Proxyopolists. And don't forget to subscribe to wherever you are listening to Proxyopoly TM podcasts, or follow, or however each platform wants you to engage further in its algorithmic methodologies. Proxyopoly is here for you to take part in it, to indulge in it, to bask in it, become addicted to it, work a 12-step Proxyopoly TM program. I am powerless over Proxyopoly. But it's kind of manageable now. I'm not going to lie. We kind of got this thing down pat. I mean, we got this Proxyopoly TM research report, and it's kind of going pretty smoothly. And if you want to have your own sponsored content or contributed content on this podcast, which is easily produced now, I could do it in my fucking sleep. But I don't sleep. I only proxy. Because I am the proxy of this Proxyopoly TM podcast. But if you want to proxy on the Proxyopoly TM podcast, all you gotta do is contact Proxyopoly TM today at the ascribed Linktree /NASCAR COSA. Now back to your regularly scheduled Proxyopoly TM programming. And we're back. Moving on to the second section of the podcast. The final Proxyopoly TM score. Lockheed Martin's final Proxyopoly TM score is the normalized weighted average of the 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings. And just as a reminder, those Proxyopoly TM ratings for Lockheed Martin are as follows. Proxy accumulation resistance, positive 0.76. Bylaw fortification index, negative 0.20. Shareholder hostility quotient, positive 1.05. Executive entrenchment factor, positive 1.90. And regulatory evasion measure, positive to spot 10. And now we calculate the final Proxyopoly TM score in our proprietary calculation methodology. Bing bing bang ba bing bum ba bing bum bing bing bam ba bing bam ba bing ba bing. Oh, it's coming up. Oh, there's toner everywhere. I'm a printer. I'm the first human printer of money, because that's what the Proxyopoly TM score is. It's just as easy as printing money if it were legal. And if the Proxyopoly TM score were legal tender, which it is not, it is actually a proprietary scoring framework protected under the trademark of Proxyopoly TM. And the final Proxyopoly TM score for Lockheed Martin is positive 1.19. That's right, Proxyopolis. To give you some interpretation, positive 1.19 is an above average governance volatility profile. The score is not driven by charter or bylaw fortifications, as bylaw fortification index is slightly negative. It is driven by the CEO chair duality and recurring resistance to structural checks, as well as procurement integrity enforcement and a large-scale program oversight risk, amplified by conflict-linked demand and ESG externalities, etc. Having now concluded the Proxyopoly TM score and laid that shit on the table for your listening pleasure, we now are moving in motion the governance policy change recommendation section of the podcast. The Proxyopoly TM recommendations focus on lowering the volatility profile closer to zero, proxy zero. If you have been listening, you know what that means. Without pretending that defense contracting can be made low stakes. It cannot. However, corporate governance can be made less fragile, less concentrated, and more credible in the places that create the largest tail risks. Proxyopoly TM governance policy change recommendation number 1. Adopt an independent chair policy with a defined transition trigger. The board continues to defend CEO chair duality and unanimously recommends against the independent chair proposal. Again, Proxyopoly TM recommends voting for that shareholder proposal to perhaps separate the roles of CEO and chairperson, because again and again and again, we say this on each episode of the podcast, if you have a combined CEO and chairperson, fuck that. Proxyopoly TM recommends adopting a policy that the chair will be independent by default, with narrowly defined, time-limited exception for CEO transition periods. For example, a 1-year window. This preserves flexibility while reducing chronic entrenchment. In a business where procurement, integrity, and wartime demand, we are in a time of fucking war again. What is it, 2003? Somebody play Green Day. Are they here? Next up is musical guest Green Day. Alright, thanks so much. In a business where procurement integrity and wartime demand can drive public intervention, flexibility is not a sufficient accountability substitute. The reason why Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against any combined chair and CEO and recommends voting for any shareholder proposal that puts in motion changes to separate those roles is because when you have the shareholder meeting, the chairperson sets the goddamn agenda. And if you have the CEO, the executive, and the chairperson who are also the same person, they are setting the agenda for shareholders as well as running the company. Proxyopoly TM identifies this as a conflict of interest and will fight tooth and nail until every CEO chair position is separate and made to be two people. Namely, fighting for each and every case where it can be a chairperson, not just a chairman. As studies have found that indeed, long-term investment results yield better returns with a diversified board. These are facts. These aren't just from my brain. They come from academic studies on the subject. And I am not going to get into this further because otherwise it's going to turn into some... this is not InfoWars. This is goddamn Proxyopoly, people. I'm just trying to play the game here. Will you play along? All right. Moving on. Governance policy change recommendation by Proxyopoly TM number 2. Expand proxy access capacity and reduce special meeting aggregation friction. Lockheed Martin's proxy access is real, but capped at 2 nominees. And special meeting rights require 10% individually or 25% in the aggregate. Proxyopoly TM recommends increasing proxy access capacity, for example, up to 20% of the board, subject to reasonable caps, and lowering the aggregate special meeting threshold while preserving anti-abuse protections. The board already claims it values shareholder engagement. These reforms convert engagement from calendar activity into a credible toolset. And we all love a good tool that's right for the job. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM governance policy change recommendation number 3. Establish a board-level public money integrity compliance charter with auditable metrics. And that is auditable, not audible. Phonetics, podcasting. The Department of Justice defective pricing settlement underscores that pricing controls and cost pricing disclosure integrity are not optional. They are foundational to trust in procurement markets, especially when doing business with the federal government funded by United States taxpayers. Proxyopoly TM recommends a formal board charter owned jointly by the Audit Committee and the Classified Business and Security Committee, requiring periodic independent testing of truth in negotiations related controls and supplier data governance, escalation procedures, and audit readiness. This should include board-facing metrics, frequency, severity of control exceptions, remediation cycle times, and independent audit findings, disclosed at a high level without compromising classified content. And we still believe in privileged and confidential information here at Proxyopoly TM, but if it's out there, we are going to find it. Proxyopoly TM governance policy change recommendation number 4. Strengthen the governance around classified program execution and loss prevention. Lockheed Martin disclosed significant reach-forward losses on an ongoing classified aeronautics program and explicitly warned that additional losses might be necessary if performance issues persist. The board already assigns oversight of classified program, operational and financial risk, and the security of personnel, facilities, and data, including classified cybersecurity and artificial intelligence matters, to the Classified Business and Security Committee at Lockheed Martin. Proxyopoly TM recommends that the board publish a classified program governance transparency layer, number of independent program reviews per year, phase gate discipline metrics, and how the Classified Business and Security Committee, or CBS Committee, intervenes when milestones slip. The point is not to disclose classified details, it is to disclose that governance exists beyond trust us. Proxyopoly TM's got the trust issues. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM governance policy change recommendation number 5. Tie executive compensation more explicitly to compliance and program integrity outcomes. The proxy statement emphasizes pay for performance, design, and high say on pay support. Proxyopoly TM recommends sharpening the performance definition. Include explicit negative modifiers for procurement integrity events. For example, pricing integrity findings, major program execution failures tied to controls, not just technical risk, and verified compliance breakdowns. Dun dun. Lockheed Martin already references clawback and recovery frameworks in its compensation governance. Proxyopoly TM calls for clearer triggers and disclosure around when and how they apply in the procurement and compliance context. There's accountability in them hells. Moving on to Proxyopoly TM governance policy change recommendation number 6. Replace virtual-only annual general meetings with hybrid format using enforceable participation standards. Lockheed Martin explains that it conducts the annual meeting exclusively online to facilitate attendance. Proxyopoly TM recommends a hybrid meeting format with enforceable rules. Publish Q&A rules in advance. Commit to answering a representative set of questions, including critical questions, and provide a post-meeting Q&A transcript with limited redactions for classified content. For a company already constrained by disclosure limits, governance legitimacy depends on maximizing, not minimizing, meaningful shareholder participation. Why? Moving on to Proxyopoly TM recommendation number 7. Adopt a conflict, demand, and human rights governance disclosure framework. Lockheed Martin explicitly ties the increased demand to
recent regional conflicts and presents its product's role in conflict environments as a demand driver. Proxyopoly TM recommends a board-level disclosure framework that describes how the company governs human rights, risks, and use monitoring, cooperation, and escalation protocols when products are implicated in civilian harm controversies. This is not a moral posture. It is volatility control. A company that can profit when conflicts intensify must demonstrate governance that prevents profitability from becoming perceived profiteering, because the latter invites policy backlash and procurement constraints.
That's some good Proxyopoly pop. Proxyopoly TM Governance Policy Change Recommendation number 8. Increase transparency on lobbying sign-off and policy priorities. Political scrutiny of defense contractor lobbying is not hypothetical. It is explicit in public correspondence questioning tax advocacy while profits remain high. The governance committee's chartered responsibilities include oversight of political spending. Proxyopoly TM recommends a clearer annual reconciliation. Total lobbying spending, including trade associations, top policy priorities, and board-level approval processes, so that investors can distinguish policy participation from policy capture. Thus concludes the second section of this podcast episode. Before moving on to the third and final segment, the Proxyopoly TM Annual General Meeting voting recommendations for the Board of Directors of Lockheed Martin for the 2026 Annual General Meeting. We will be taking a second intermission. If you've been listening to this podcast for a prolonged period of time since the beginning, you understand the drill. You know there's gonna be something we're gonna plug, because Proxyopoly TM loves plugging that sponsored content and contributed content. And if you want to submit your own, you know where to do it. It's on the link tree at linktree/NASCAR-COSA. Because I could plug myself in here. I could plug myself in a lot of things I don't belong in. But, you know, the time is not the place, and the place is not the time. Time is a flat circle. But if you're listening to this, we're operating on a linear forward-moving time plane. If you hadn't heard the news, that's where we are. You know, we're here. You know, your third dimensional self. That's there's an audio part of me that's penetrating the aerial waves that makes the quantum perplexities perplexify into what you perceive to be, completely wasting your time with this unnecessary section where there could be a company plugging its own products. But you know what? Proxyopoly doesn't believe in pandering. Proxyopoly believes in free access podcasting. And I will not accept a sponsor that is going to censor what I have to say. And that's a high probability. I mean, if you look around, if I get, say, a cheese cracker company, Anonymous Cheese Crackers. Their brand is just Anonymous. They make cheese crackers. If I made an episode about them, you think they would try to tell me how I should tell you how to vote their proxies, which are your proxies, for their company? You bet they would. But I'm not going to give in to big cheese. I am here for the Proxyopolists. We will Proxyopoly as one, my fellow Proxyopolists at home. And we'll wrap up this section of the intermission with the ever-conclusive reminder: if you do not know who the proxy is, then the proxy is you. All right. I'd say that was a pretty good intermission. I don't get... Who the fuck are you people? Get out of my house. I told Anonymous Big Cheese I wasn't going to do it. Okay? I'm not accepting their offer. Now get out of my house. Get out of my damn house. Yeah. How did y'all get in here? Y'all aren't even real. Man, this is some good proxy pop. May contain antipsychotics. Ah, hell. All right, now moving on to the next section of the podcast, which you've all been waiting for. The part where Proxyopoly TM publishes recommendations on how shareholders should vote their proxies at the upcoming annual general meeting of Lockheed Martin in 2026. And the meeting date for that AGM is May 12th, 2026. And all shareholders who held shares as of the record date on March 2nd, 2026 will be eligible to vote with the shares in the amount that was held and settled that day. Proxyopoly TM applies a higher bar here for this company in this section because the company's Proxyopoly TM score is driven by leadership concentration and compliance program risk, not so much as bad bylaws. Committee chairs and governance leaders, therefore, carry heavier accountability weight than a typical issuer. And a reminder that the 2026 proxy statement for Lockheed Martin indicates Proposal 1 is the election of 9 directors, identifying the annual meeting date, record date, and virtual meeting format. It also notes that Director Joseph F. Dunford, Jr. is not standing for re-election and will remain Classified Business and Security Committee Chair until the annual meeting. First director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is James D. Taiclet. Chairperson, President, and Chief Executive Officer. Non-independent Director on the Management Committee. Combined Chairperson and CEO. Proxyopoly TM Board Voting Recommendation. Vote against. The board explicitly endorses CEO Chair duality as its preferred leadership structure. Proxyopoly TM recommends against because concentrated leadership is a volatility amplifier in a business with elevated procurement integrity exposure and public governance spillovers. As reflected in Department of Justice's defective pricing settlement narrative, the company also ties increased demand to conflict conditions, which increases ESG scrutiny and therefore raises the governance standard for independence at the top. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Thomas J. Falk, Independent Lead Director, Governance Committee Chair, Nominating and Corporate Governance Committee Chair, ex officio all committees via Lead Independent Director duties. Proxyopoly TM Board Voting Recommendation. Abstain. The lead director role is described as robust, but it exists inside a structure the board repeatedly defends. Combined Chair CEO. As Governance Committee Chair, he is the principal architect of whether the board adopts structural accountability reforms. For example, independent chair. Yet the board continues to recommend against the independent chair proposal. Proxyopoly TM recommends abstain to signal that robust lead independent director is not an adequate substitute for an independent chair in a high-stakes public procurement enterprise, and recognizes that an against or withhold vote on both the CEO and the lead independent director would be problematic for succession planning. Ergo, Proxyopoly TM recommends vote abstain for Thomas J. Falk, lead independent director of Lockheed Martin. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Patricia E. Yarrington, Independent Director, Audit Committee Chair, Classified Business and Security Committee Member, Proxyopoly TM Voting Recommendation. Withhold. The Audit Committee is responsible for the oversight of financial statement integrity, compliance, ERM processes, and it is chaired by Ms. Yarrington. Proxyopoly TM recommends withholding support with a withhold vote because the company disclosed large reach-forward losses, including $950 million on an ongoing classified aeronautics program, and warns of possible additional losses. Signals of execution, control, stress that demand heightened audit and governance risk credibility. The Classified Business and Security Committee role, adds accountability for classified program risk oversight, which is explicitly within the Classified Business and Security Committee remit. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is Joseph F. Dunford, Jr. Again, not seeking re-election here, but still chair of the Classified Business and Security Committee. Also member of the Governance Committee. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation. Abstain. The 2026 proxy statement states General Dunford is not standing for re-election, so there is no meaningful director election vote to cast at the 2026 AGM for him. Proxyopoly TM assigns abstain functionally not applicable because he chairs the Classified Business and Security Committee. Until the meeting, shareholders should still treat the Classified Business and Security transition as material. The Classified Business and Security Committee oversees classified program operational and financial risk and the security of personnel, facilities, and data, including classified cybersecurity and artificial intelligence matters. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is John M. Donovan. Independent Director, Compensation Committee Chair, Management Development and Compensation Committee Chair, member of the Classified Business and Security Committee. Proxyopoly TM Board Voting Recommendation. Withhold. The Compensation Committee Chair is central to aligning incentives with execution integrity and compliance risk. Yet the company's disclosed program loss profile indicates that execution volatility remains material, particularly in classified programs. Proxyopoly TM recommends withhold because compensation governance should more visibly price procurement integrity and program control risk in a company that has faced Department of Justice defective pricing allegations. His Classified Business and Security Committee membership adds further accountability for classified program risk oversight. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is John C. Aquilino, Independent Director, Classified Business and Security Committee member. Proxyopoly TM Board Voting Recommendation. Abstain. Proxyopoly TM recommends abstain as a targeted retain domain expertise vote. The Classified Business and Security Committee explicitly oversees classified program, operational, and financial risk, and classified cybersecurity, as well as artificial intelligence matters, and directors with relevant operational understanding can improve oversight quality if they apply it as governance discipline, not managerial deference. This recommendation is deliberately paired with broad withhold votes for committee and governance leadership to avoid treating the entire board as equally accountable for structural choices and past oversight posture. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is David B. Burritt, Independent Director, Audit Committee member, Management Development and Compensation Committee member. Proxyopoly TM Board Voting Recommendation. Withhold. Mr. Burritt serves simultaneously on the Audit Committee and the Compensation Committee, two committees that sit at the core of accountability when program execution and volatility as well as compliance risk are elevated. Proxyopoly TM recommends withhold because the company's reach forward loss disclosures, including classified program losses, demand unusually strong audit and incentive governance, and shareholders are justified in signaling dissatisfaction with the board's current accountability model. In a CEO chair structure, committee members, not just the CEO, must carry visible accountability weight. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is Vicki A. Hollub, independent director, audit committee member, management development and compensation committee member. Proxyopoly TM board voting recommendation, withhold. Ms. Hollub sits on both audit and compensation committees, placing her directly in the path of shareholder accountability, expectations for compliance, risk, and incentive design. Proxyopoly TM recommends withhold because the company's conflict-linked demand narrative is an ESG scrutiny amplifier and requires heightened governance credibility across stakeholder risks, not only financial metrics. Combined with the company's significant program loss disclosures, shareholders should send a signal that audit and pay committees must evolve towards stronger risk pricing and governance transparency. Next director of the board for re-election on the docket today is Debra L. Reed-Klages, independent director, management development and compensation committee member, governance committee member. Proxyopoly TM voting recommendation, withhold. Ms. Reed-Klages sits on the governance committee, which the proxy describes as overseeing ethics, sustainability, and political spending, as well as governance policy. And on the compensation committee, which governs incentives. Proxyopoly TM recommends withhold because the board's continued opposition to an independent chair proposal and its preference for CEO chair duality reflects governance choices that heighten entrenchment in an extremely high public risk company. The combination of governance policy power and incentive oversight warrants a sharper accountability signal than a routine for vote. Next director of the board up for re-election on the docket today is Heather Wilson, independent director, classified business and security committee member. Proxyopoly TM board voting recommendation, withhold. The Classified Business and Security Committee's remit includes oversight of classified program, operational, and financial risks, and the security of personnel, facilities, and data, including classified cybersecurity and artificial intelligence matters. Proxyopoly TM recommends withhold because the company disclosed major classified program losses and ongoing performance issues that could require additional losses, which elevates the accountability burden for classified business security committee members. The recommendation of withhold is a demand for stronger, more provable oversight, especially when transparency is constrained by classification. This concludes all of the recommendations for all the members of the board for the upcoming annual general meeting of Lockheed Martin, which is again on May 12th, 2026. In conclusion, Lockheed Martin's final Proxyopoly score of positive 1.19 reflects a company that is not structurally fortified against shareholders, but is meaningfully exposed to governance volatility because leadership is concentrated at the top and compliance program risk is not a theoretical abstraction. It is documented in enforcement actions, Government Accountability Office oversight signals, and large program loss disclosures. The environmental, social, governance, ESG dimension is not optional. When the company itself links increased demand and business transformation to recent regional conflicts across the globe and frames demand as unprecedented, the governance burden increases. Shareholders must be able to trust that incentives, controls, and oversight are strong enough to prevent procurement integrity events and execution failures from becoming public legitimacy crises. Proxyopoly TM therefore recommends a governance posture that is less deferential to flexibility and more committed to structural accountability. Independent chair by default, stronger proxy access, and more transparent classified program governance metrics, as well as compensation tied more explicitly to compliance and program integrity. And that's all the time we have for this episode, Proxyopolis. Thanks again for tuning in. And as always, we wrap up this podcast with the final disclaimer. The professional opinions expressed in this podcast are property of Proxyopoly TM. The Proxyopoly TM score and accompanying analysis are purely communicative for educational entertainment purposes only. This Proxyopoly TM research report, in its verbalized or written form, is for informational objectives only, does not constitute investment advice, and shall not be misconstrued as a suggestion or an offer to buy or sell any securities. No generalist or sensationalist statements are intended or being made. Any resemblance to real-world events may be deliberate, though with Lockheed Martin's current trajectory. Reality may be catching up faster than anticipated, while past performance is not indicative of future returns. And thanks for listening, Proxyopolis. If it ain't Proxyopoly,
You Proxyopoly.